We now move to the questions to the Minister for Education. Questions 10, 12 and 15 have been withdrawn. I call Sinead McLaughlin.
Education in Northern Ireland is based on the key and guiding principle established in our law that children are educated as far as possible in accordance with the wishes of their parents. I believe that diversity and choice are a strength, not a weakness, of our education system. Every child, every school and every sector are important and valued in our education system. Integrated education, which provides opportunities for children and young people from different community backgrounds to learn together, has an important role to play in that process. The number of pupils accessing integrated education continues to grow. Over 27,000 pupils in Northern Ireland are now enrolled in 71 integrated schools. That is over 6,000 additional places in the last 10 years. To measure, assess and aim to meet demand for integrated education, my department will do the following: include societal level questions on demand and the factors parents consider when making school admission decisions in the annual Northern Ireland Life and Time Survey, assess and monitor parental demand for integrated education as expressed through school admission preferences via the EA School Admissions Portal, use the EA School Admissions Portal to obtain permission from parents to be surveyed regarding their school admission preferences, and annually carry out a Northern Ireland-wide survey of such parents to assess and monitor demand for integrated education. It will carry out ad hoc local surveys of parents to further assess and monitor demand as required. It will consider the outcomes of parental ballots for transformation carried out by electoral reform services and consider any other relevant survey data available. So where demand is identified through this structured and systemic analysis, I will ensure that NICE and EA, as the arm's-length bodies charged with promoting integrated education and providing sufficient places to meet parental preference respectively, work with their parents or partners across the education sector to meet this demand.
Mr. Loughlin.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer. Your department's implementation strategy for integrated education actually doesn't set any targets for the growth of integrated education and doesn't tell us how much money you're actually going to spend. But your actions have told us that you are not serious about integrated education because you've taken away £150 million of capital spend on integrated education. So can you explain how we can reach realistic targets if we're not actually setting them in the strategy?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So what I have been successfully able to do is have £150 million identified for the Struil campus in Omagh. The member may wish to take it up with Mr McCrossan, who has advocated very well for his constituency to ensure there are 6 new schools developed in that area as part of a shared educational programme. What I also was able to do successfully was place the integrated schools that were as part of the Fresh Start programme into my conventional capital programme, and I announced last week that Bangor Central Integrated Primary School and Millennium Integrated Primary School were moving forward and getting funding. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure where the member gets her information from, but that is the facts, and I am treating all sectors equitably. No one sector will get preferential treatment over another. I will treat them all fairly.
Mr. Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister explain the capital spent on integrated schools over the past 5 years and how this compares with the percentage of children who attend integrated schools?
Minister.
Obviously, when it comes to expenditure over the past 5 years, there has been significant spend, and that comes to £92.7 million. That represents approximately 22% of all major works expenditure across the school estate in that period. And I'm sure the member will agree, with only 8% of pupils attending integrated schools, this highlights the significant additional investment that integrated schools have received compared to other school sectors.
Jan Mulholland.
Mr. Speaker, Minister, Clause 9 of the Integrated Education Bill states that Integrated Education Action Plan must include targets and measurable benchmarks. Can we get a justification as to why the Department has moved away from this and towards an outcomes-based approach instead?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, happy to provide precise detail to that question, but what I would say to members, the schools that I have visited from various sectors, whilst some may not have integrated officially in their title, there are control schools more integrated than some schools that are officially designated as integrated. And so I've said this before, the inference that somehow other school sectors do not provide an integrated form of education isn't right and is disrespectful to those schools. I was in Upper Bann with my constituency colleague Diane Dodds. Over 21 newcomers within that school environment. I was at another school where there were 18 different nationalities, all within the control sector, integrated, diverse, but it doesn't have it in their official title. So members, particularly in the Alliance Party, do need to get off this particular issue of wanting preferential treatment for one sector. If you want to be a community for all, try including everybody.
Philip Brett. Question number 2, Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Seaview Primary School project is in the early stages of development, with an integrated consultant team having been appointed for the project in November 2023. The ICT is currently undertaking a technical feasibility study to explore options and costs to provide suitable accommodation for the school, and it is anticipated that a report will be submitted to the Department for consideration in the coming months. Once the technical feasibility report has been examined and approved by the Department, a business case will be completed which will identify the preferred option to be taken forward.
Mr. Brett.
Speaker, and delivering the new school at Seaview will be vital for the local community, but just as important as our school buildings are those who work within it, and particularly I think of our non-teaching support staff. I know the Minister shares my commitment to ensure they receive the pay and grading review that they need. Could the Minister provide an update on his work to secure those vital funds for that sector?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I can update the House in terms of progress that has been made. Last week I engaged with the unions directly. I spent a number of hours with the team. I stood up officials within my department and we made progress over the weekend, and I engaged directly with the Finance Minister and we identified a way forward that I believe can lead to a successful resolution. The unions decided not to proceed with their industrial action today. That was important to have schools open, particularly within our special schools, where those children and young people with complex needs require that regular form of access to the school environment, and strike action is particularly disruptive on those most vulnerable. We also had GCSE Maths sitting today, and there was a concern that we wouldn't be able to have those exams go forward for everybody. And I think everyone in this House would agree that for those young people who have worked so hard, not to have the opportunity to sit those exams would have been something that was unacceptable. So I was pleased that we didn't have the strike action today. Mr Speaker, I can update the House further that we engaged this morning with the unions. That was a very positive meeting, and schools are being contacted by the Education Authority to advise them that strike action shouldn't be taking place tomorrow, but the unions are still going through officially their processes. But we are operating now on the assumption that schools will be able to open as normal tomorrow. We will continue to work on the finer details of this, because support staff who are in our classrooms, who are in our catering teams, who are driving the buses, are incredibly important, and I deeply value the work that they do, and it is vitally important that this pay and grading review is resolved, and we engage with Treasury, but we also look to our own resources within the Assembly to find a way forward, and I will continue to work constructively with the unions until we get a permanent solution.
Mr Speaker, Minister, my son was delighted the boss of all schools visited his nursery last week, and I just wanted to ask in relation to the capital bills, the announcement for 2024-25, when he hopes building work will begin at Millennium Integrated Primary School.
Minister.
So, Mr Speaker, in announcing the capital bills last week, which again was a positive announcement, a demonstration that this executive can work even with the difficult financial constraints that we're operating in. 8 new school builds, 7 primary, 1 post-primary, and within that, Millennium Integrated was included. That allows us to move forward into securing a tendering process that will lead to contract, and Millennium Integrated is at a very advanced stage. So there is no further obstacle in respect of us moving forward into construction. The precise date when a digger will arrive on site, I can't give the member, but we are taking that forward, and I know that is particularly welcomed by those schools. And Millennium Integrated was one that was unfairly caught in the Treasury process around Fresh Start. I'm pleased that we were able to step in and take that forward.
On Chambers.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'll answer oral questions 3 and 6 together. The Addressing Bullying in Schools Act of 2016 came into operation from the 1st of September 2021. The Act has 3 core parts. It provides a common definition of bullying, establishes a new duty for schools to record all incidences of bullying, their motivation and their outcome, and requires the schools' boards of governors to take responsibility for the development, implementation, monitoring and periodic review of the school's anti-bullying policies. Concerns were raised during the public consultation on the legislative proposals that led to the Act that any such data held by the Department of Education or the Education Authority would be subject to the Freedom of Information Act and could therefore potentially allow external organisations to create bullying league tables. The then Education Minister subsequently stated that there were no plans to collect or publish any information in relation to bullying incidents. The Department has therefore not directly collated data from schools in relation to bullying incidents. Following initial information and training, offers the Department established the Addressing Bullying in Schools Implementation Team, ABSIT for short, in September of 2022. The data is held by ABSIT within EA in terms of its response to referrals. Between September 22 to March 24, ABSIT had responded to 577 referrals relating to bullying type behaviour. The team have provided specific support to schools with regard to 185 significant bullying type cases, delivered training to 147 school leadership teams and bespoke training to 110 school governors. And since its launch in January 2024, the Level 1 Foundation training on the Act has been completed by 3,848 educationalists.
Mr. Chambers.
Speaker. Minister, thank you for that answer. Does the Minister anticipate that this data will be used to develop a universal approach across all schools in tackling bullying, or does he believe a tailored solution in individual schools is the best way forward?
Minister.
Well, where there's best practice, we need to make sure we disseminate that, that is something that, of course, we will want to do and facilitate. I've outlined how we have been making efforts to address these issues. Often schools are best placed with the right kind of support, which needs to be consistent across Northern Ireland at resolving these issues. But where we can identify best practice, it's important that we disseminate that information.
Connie Egan.
Mr. Speaker, and Minister, research from Carafriend shows 68% of pupils in secondary school that are LGBTQ+ are bullied due to their sexual orientation or gender identity. What plans do you and your department have to tackle homophobic and transphobic bullying in schools?
Minister. Speaker, all forms of bullying is wrong. Bullying in respect of one's sexual orientation is wrong. And it's important that schools address that issue alongside other forms of bullying which does take place. So, of course, my department will continue with the Education Authority to support schools when it comes to addressing bullying behaviour which is unacceptable in our school system.
Stephen Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for his commitments to tackle bullying. Is there best practice in other jurisdictions that we can learn from, particularly focusing on the ever-increasing rise of cyberbullying, which impacts children and young people so much more now, right beyond the school opening and closing hours?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the Department will be collecting data from other jurisdictions, and further research will be carried out in respect of this issue, so that where we identify alternative methods of addressing these issues that we are not already carrying out, then we will learn from that. Data on bullying experiences among children and young people has been gathered by governments in England, Wales and Scotland, and that has been carried out through a range of health, well-being and crime surveys. However, our understanding is that data on bullying type behaviour is an issue just to disseminate. So the answer, yes, we will be carrying out further research to identify other international approaches to managing the problem.
Thank the Minister for his answers thus far. Minister, further research is not going to cut it in relation to the previous question. Addressing bullying in schools, specifically in relation to social media platforms, where we know children are dying because of bullying behaviours on those platforms. What communications have you had and your department have had with those companies to outline their responsibilities in terms of their platforms being havens for bullies and bullying behaviours, which are having a devastating impact on children and young people who are on the receiving end?
Mr Speaker, it's actions and further research to make sure that the actions that we are taking, where they can be improved, then they will be improved. It isn't an either-or. We're doing far more than just putting research into this particular issue, and I outlined the measures and the impacts that we've already been having in trying to support schools. But the member does raise an important issue when it comes to online social media abuse, and children in particular at a very sensitive age are much more vulnerable to this than adults, and it can be devastating for adults as well. So it is vitally important that we're supporting schools as they seek to manage the issues around online communication, social media posts, and all of this can be very difficult to do. And so what I can do to support schools, I will do, and where we can have research to provide better informed practices, then we will do that through research to help inform how we address these issues.
John Blair.
Mr Speaker, question number 4.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The school uniform grant is available to offer financial support to low-income families as a contribution towards the costs of school uniforms. The Education Authority was able to uplift its school uniform grant rates by 20% in 2022-23 following an additional allocation of funding by the previous Minister of Education. Severe budgetary pressures mean that it has not been possible to allocate additional funding to the Education Authority to implement a further rise in the rates of uniform grant for the 2024-25 academic year, and I recognise that there are other parts of the United Kingdom where higher rates of uniform grant are available, and I would obviously like to be able to allocate additional funding to the Education Authority that would enable a rise in the uniform grant. However, this can only be done when the funding is available to do so. While recognising the rate of uniform grant is one way to reduce the impact of uniform costs on low-income families, I believe that schools seeking to minimise the costs of their uniform can potentially be of even greater benefit, and schools should therefore endeavour to align their school's uniform requirements with the Department's guidance circular that encourages them to keep school uniform costs to a minimum.
Mr Blair.
Mr Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister for that question. I think he almost referred to the fact that it is disappointing you. So can I ask then, that given that addressing the extortionate cost of school uniforms was identified as a key priority when he took up office, and I understand officials had previously worked on fairly detailed proposals around this, then why has it taken so long to bring forward a consultation on this issue?
Minister. Mr Speaker, the member rightly raises my desire to address this issue in terms of the current guidance which exists into placing that on a statutory footing. I have engaged already with the schools with letters to principals reminding them of that circular, appealing to them to follow it. The overwhelming majority of schools do follow that guidance, but we need to have all schools following that guidance, and so there will be a public consultation launched within weeks before the end of this particular period of the Assembly's timetable, before it breaks for the recess, and that will seek the views of the public in relation to placing it on a statutory footing, and within that we will also seek views in relation to a cost cap.
Matthew Toole.
Speaker, Minister, 3 months ago the Assembly debated a motion which called for many of the actions that you're now talking about. Can you be specific? You said that the consultation is going to be launched hopefully before recess. Can you give us a timeline for when you want this guidance to be put into statute? Will it be by the end of this year, by the end of this mandate? When precisely?
Minister.
So, Mr. Speaker, I obviously will not be able to have the guidance placed on a statutory footing for this September. Many schools have already engaged in retailers and the supply chain, and therefore we won't be able to do that. But what I was able to do was to remind schools to follow the guidance, and the overwhelming majority are doing that. I want to have it on a statutory footing for the commencement of the following academic year, so that there is a statutory basis for it. And of course we need to work out how do we monitor that, what role potentially could the inspectorate have to ensure that the legislation that gets passed by this House is given effect to it. Because it is one thing to place something on a statutory footing, it is another to monitor and ultimately enforce. And how can you do that? What would be the sanction for not doing it? And that is things that need to be worked out as part of the consultation process and then the legislative process whenever the bill would be introduced to this Assembly.
David Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister had mentioned that the rates elsewhere in the UK in some places are higher. Can you give any further details on how the rate here compares to other parts of the UK and the Republic of Ireland?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In terms of comparators, in England, many local authorities don't offer any uniform grants, and in those that do, there can be considerable variation in the level of support, and that can vary from £30 to £160. In Scotland, there's a minimum level uniform grant of £120 per child at primary school and £150 per child at post-primary. In Wales, they have a Schools Essential grant, and that's aimed towards supporting parents in uniform costs, but also sports kits, IT equipment, and that would be £125 per pupil, £200 for pupils in post-primary. So there are a range of different support measures that exists, and there isn't one uniform approach, pardon the pun, in respect of how the costs are calculated and then what the payments go towards. We have our own scheme. It was a DUP education minister who increased it by 20%. It had stood still for nearly a decade, and there had been no increase until my predecessor, Michelle McElveen, addressed the issue then. I've indicated my desire to do more, but that requires the Department of Education to have the resources available to it for us to do more.
Dan Dodds.
Number 5, Minister.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The executive budget provides the department with a capital budget of £254 million for the 2024-25 year, which is an increase of over £80 million on last year's opening position. This additional funding has allowed me to release 7 school enhancement programmes, in addition to the major new capital bids that were announced. The school enhancement programmes include Carnini Primary School, Kilronan School, Lurgan Model Integrated Primary School, St John's Primary School in King Island, St Kevin's College, St Malachy's College, St Mary's Primary School in Bard. The budget is available to progress all other school enhancement projects through the design and planning to the pre-tender stage. A decision to release these to tender and construction will then be taken dependent on budget availability at the time. And whilst the additional funding, Mr. Speaker, is extremely positive and welcome, the department continues to face significant capital pressures, particularly for special educational needs placements, and therefore difficult decisions will continue to be required around prioritisation. And my vision is that every child is educated in a high quality learning environment, and the school enhancement programme is key to delivering on this vision by providing significant improvements to a school's teaching and learning facilities. It is a high impact and relatively low cost programme which can make a lasting improvement to a school. So I will continue to make the case for increased investment in the education estate to ensure that every child can enjoy the benefits of improved teaching and learning facilities.
Ms Dodds.
And thank you, Minister. You referenced recently that we visited some schools in Upper Bann, and one of those schools was Carrick Primary School, and you quite rightly talked about 21 different languages and a really diverse, inclusive school. But they've been waiting 5 years on a business case for a school enhancement programme. And this is clearly an unacceptably long wait. And I know that you took cognizance of this. Can the Minister tell us what he can do with the Education Authority in order to shorten this time frame and allow schools to proceed to the point where they are eligible for funding?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, the member rightly makes the point around the length of time it takes to move through the various stages until they are at the point of being able to move into that tender construction phase. And it is a frustration that I share, and one which at Carrick the member had me at, and other principals have articulated to me in respect of that. So obviously we need to look at the processes, how we can go through the various different stages in terms of making that more efficient and expediting them at a faster pace. That's a piece of work that officials in my department are looking at with the Education Authority, and it is ultimately for the Education Authority to be planning out the school estate, particularly for controlled schools, and making sure that the support is there, and I need to support them in terms of discharging their responsibilities effectively for our schools.
Nick Matheson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Education Committee recently visited the Forest School in Clandyboy and heard from a couple of primary schools about the transformative impact of quality outdoor learning provision. Are there any plans in the Minister's capital budget for the financial year ahead to release monies to school to put in place quality outdoor learning provision?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, the member and chair of the committee highlights the Forest schools, and I've been impressed at the number of schools that I've visited that have been able to incorporate some of the trees and different vegetation that is within their estate. And you can see, children and young people love to be outside, and they love to be picking up all of those bugs and beetles and different things, and valuing how to protect them. So the Forest Schools is a good initiative. But it speaks to the issue of outdoor play. And so within the announcement that I made last week around the capital programme, I did announce a new curriculum-led capital programme. We've allocated £10 million to that. That is largely to focus on things around outdoor play, physical education. Where a school is not able to properly deliver its curriculum, how can we support this? So that is a new capital programme that I announced. We've given funding to it this year. We will want to stand that up and obviously have application to that. But that is a programme that I would want to see over the next number of years building upon to make it a bigger programme. That's why I continue to make the case, unapologetically so, for my department to get more funding on its recurrent resource side, but also when it comes to the capital expenditure.
Colin McGrath.
Givan, Mr Speaker.
Sir.
Mr Speaker, my department is responsible for the home to school transport policy and the Education Authority for its operation and delivery. This includes route planning and determining eligibility for transport assistance in line with the policy. The EA determines its bus routes based on public demand in the area, and routes are reviewed on an ongoing basis, particularly at the start of the school year. Eligibility is assessed on an individual pupil basis using two criteria, namely distance and suitable school. It's for the EA to determine the most suitable mode of transport for eligible pupils, which may include a seat on an EA bus, a TransLink bus pass, or a parental payment where a seat on a vehicle cannot be provided. Routes and pick-up points are often well established as serving local communities around specific schools. Parents may choose which school their child attends, but where an eligible pupil bypasses closer schools to attend one further away, there may be fewer or less convenient transport options. The Education Authority is not obliged to create new routes for small numbers or individual pupils.
That concludes questions to the Minister. Now move to topical questions, and I call Mr Jerry Carroll.
Minister, for months into this new executive, education workers were told there was no money for the pay and grading review, and now in the month of election, lo and behold, some money may be found. I emphasise the may. Can you give an update on negotiations and progress with education unions around pay and grading review?
Sir.
Speaker, I provided the House with an update to an earlier question in respect of this issue, but to say to the member, whenever I came into post, I recognised the work that our support staff carry out. I deeply value that work. I approved the business case. I put it forward to the Finance Minister. The Finance Minister approved the business case. The Executive agreed within the budget that the Executive passed that we needed to find a way forward. That way forward was to engage with the Treasury, which the Finance Minister, on behalf of the Executive, engaged and met with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, put that formally into writing. Obviously, an election has been called. That creates an issue around His Majesty's Treasury in terms of responding. But I've also tried to identify how we can take this issue forward through some funding in the June monitoring in the absence of the Treasury providing the reprofiling of future funding. Those negotiations have been taking place now, both with myself directly and with my officials, and I'm pleased that today we didn't have strike action, and I trust that we won't have that action extended tomorrow, because we want a resolution. So this is an executive, I as Minister, supported by the Finance Minister, both agree that we need to find a resolution to this issue, and we believe there is now a pathway to do that, and the unions engaging with the relevant officials should be given the space to get this issue concluded, and I hope we can expedite that as soon as possible.
Mr Carroll.
Minister, for the answer, I'm still unclear though when or if the money will be released at all. I think you need a clear answer for the lowest paid workers. Workers have said they will likely resume strike action in the autumn if this money is not in their bank accounts. Will the money be in their bank accounts by this autumn, Minister?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, when it comes to taking decisions on this issue, we have, as an executive, stepped up, and I know the member sometimes doesn't feel that that's the case, but there can be occasion where the member could recognise when there are ministers genuinely and sincerely trying to, in earnest, resolve these issues. When the institutions were restored, the funding package provided to Stormont did not include a resolution on this issue. That was not as a consequence of any member in this Assembly, and therefore we had to work forward a resolution, and we are trying to resolve. I believe we are on our way to doing that, and that will ensure that we resolve the issue around pay and grading review, because recruitment and retention in this area is hugely important, and we need to make sure that we provide the right support for those individuals who are vitally important. And I want to do more. I want to provide opportunities for career progression for classroom assistants, so that they can see how there are further opportunities in investing within our education system. So we've made progress. Schools aren't on strike. We continue to negotiate on this issue, and I believe that there is a pathway forward that will resolve this permanently.
Al Robinson.
Would the Minister agree with me that book reading is key to a child's early learning?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes, I would agree about the importance of reading to young children, encouraging their enjoyment of books, which has a positive impact, we know from the evidence around children's early learning and development in terms of their language, communication and social skills.
Mr Robinson.
I certainly thank the Minister for his answer. Would the Minister consider reinstating the Book Start Baby programme?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, before my first child was even born, I was reading to my wife. Hopefully Annie was picking up some of it before she came into this world. The importance of reading can't be understated or overstated, because it does have a hugely beneficial impact to the development of children. And so I will be reinstating this important programme. Northern Ireland is the only part of the United Kingdom where the Book Start Baby programme is not currently available, and I'm determined to address this inequality, and I've asked Book Start to submit a proposal to extend this important provision to Northern Ireland this year. The funding made available by the Executive to support the early learning and childcare strategy will enable us to put in place this vital provision for our youngest children.
Tennyson.
Mr Speaker, Minister, further to the framework on developing a more strategic approach to 14 to 19 education and training, can you update the Assembly on when the agreed success measures for the 14 to 19 landscape will be published?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I don't have that particular detail just at hand for the member, but I'm happy to provide that in more detail. Suffice to say, he raises the issue around 14 to 19-year-olds, which is important, and it's one where there's collaboration between my department and the Minister for the Economy, and I met with the Minister a number of weeks ago around the framework in which the two departments operate. We're going to review that framework to make sure that when it comes to our schools and our colleges, that we are effectively collaborating together.
Mr Tennyson.
Thank the Minister for that. The Minister will be aware that the Education and Economy committees held a concurrent meeting last week in which education officials said there were currently no plans to publish the framework on the action plan for the framework on 14 to 19 education. How does the Minister expect those committees to scrutinise that work if the action plan isn't available to measure progress against?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure if the exact and precise reasons why that hasn't been provided. It may be an entirely internal-facing document. That could be the reason. I don't know the reason for that, but I'll certainly provide a written response to the member.
Peter McReynolds.
I thank the Minister for his answers so far. Can I ask for an update on SEN placements for the new academic year?
Minister. Mr Speaker, this is an issue which I recognise, as all members do, requires a resolution. And whenever I first again came into office, the indications were that there were some 1,000 children needing to be placed in September. That led to action on my part to communicate to schools directly, seeking indications from those schools that would be willing to provide a place for this September. There were over 700 schools responded to that, over 300 of them positively. We then carried out a short survey around the needs of those schools, identifying across Northern Ireland where specific pressures are, trying to make sure that it isn't just about any school, it's the right school, has to be the right place for children, and we are continuing to provide placements, and so there has been progress made, and we continue to make progress. I intend to update the House more formally whenever we have a much clearer picture, but I can say to the member that figure of 1,000 has been reduced by several hundreds, and we continue to make progress. I want to make sure that by September every child has got a place. Then we need to make sure that this isn't repeated in future years, because this happened last year, it's happening this year, and we need to ensure that we are providing the proper support for children with special educational needs.
Mr McReynolds.
I thank the Minister for his response. Can the Minister outline how he will ensure the necessary capital works are delivered for the new academic year so that all children with a specialist placement in a mainstream school or nursery are able to access their place on a full-time basis for the start of this academic year?
Mr Speaker, the priority on the capital spend has been for special educational needs provisions, and therefore there will be the funding needed to stand up the various specialist provisions so that we can address that. So we will do what we need to do to make sure support is there. But, Mr Speaker, this is why I outlined a new standalone special educational needs capital programme that is distinct to the other capital programmes within the Department of Education. I announced the immediate commencement of Givan School, Ardnashee as well, because I recognise the need that is there. We're also looking at all 39 special schools and identifying their needs in terms of capacity, and where we can take forward school enhancement programmes, we will be doing that. And there will be, we believe, 8 new schools needed in Northern Ireland, and the Education Authority, at my instruction, are already identifying the potential sites where these new schools could be established. That is important that we do that, but we also need to make sure that where mainstream schools, and it's important that there is inclusion within our education system, that we provide support to mainstream schools, and that is what we're doing. And we will address this issue this year. I'll provide a more detailed statement, Mr. Speaker, in due course, but I recognise the importance of tackling the issue. That's why I have been tackling the issue.
Dennis.
And a follow on from the last question, can I ask the Minister, will he consider a sound first approach to address the ongoing difficulties in school placements for children with special educational needs?
Sir.
Mr. Speaker, the Department is taking a sound first approach in terms of our capital, in terms of the prioritisation of investment. And for every family that isn't able to have a child placed in a school, it's a crisis for that family. And often I speak to parents, and they're already providing support for a child, a young person that needs additional support, and they're already under pressure and stress. And therefore, the position that they go through this year and still not knowing where their child's going to be placed isn't one that I believe is acceptable. So we do have a sound first approach, and we are trying to address this issue.
I appreciate the Minister's response to that, and I know he will agree that the importance of early intervention in terms of supporting children with special educational needs, and will he also apply that same logic to those children who are in need of a special educational place for preschool as well?
Mr. Speaker, I think what we were able to do as an executive, we identified £25 million for the early learning childcare strategy. Within that, there is funding which will be able to stabilise the Sure Start provision, which provides really important work even before birth and then in those pre-nursery school years. And I also want to see how Sure Start and organisations like that can be enhanced. We had 22 schemes operating in Sure Start which were of a temporary nature, so that was in addition to the permanent schemes that are there. The funding that the Executive provided will allow those 22 temporary programmes to be mainstreamed and be put on a permanent footing as part of the core work of Sure Start. And I think that will be welcomed in those areas where you've had temporary schemes and projects up and running. But I would like to do more. And as we develop the strategy, that is something that I would like to see expanded out. So it isn't just in schools. We are looking at the nursery school provision, and we're also looking at preschool. And that, again, is a demonstration that even with the difficult financial constraints that we have to operate in, this Executive is prioritising and we are delivering.
Mr. Brett's not in his place. I call Donny.
Does the Minister agree with me that the community and voluntary youth sector are invaluable to youth provision across our society?
Mr. Speaker, like the member, I also see this in my own constituency in terms of the work of the community and voluntary sector. Indeed, it's why, as part of the announcement that was made last week, wasn't picked up, but the new RAISE programme, which is about reducing educational disadvantage, speaks about the whole community approach. And that's within formal educational settings, but it's also within those other community organisations and where the voluntary sector is involved. So whether it's in youth service provision, which my department has a responsibility to support, or this new programme, which is going to build upon Fair Start, the community and the voluntary sector add so much value that it's important that they're properly utilised, and where they can do more, then it's important that I support them to do more.
Speaker.
Your answer. Can you confirm when the review of priorities for youth will be completed?
Minister.
Well, I don't have the precise date of when it will be completed. Part of the reason that it's been taken forward is for the very issues that I just outlined, because we do need to support those community and voluntary youth organisations. They do incredibly important work, and it's important that the systems are supporting them. And there has been concerns expressed to me that they feel that the system has not been supporting them in the way that they could, or that they could be delivering services in a way that maybe statutory bodies haven't been able to do as effectively as them. And we just need to make sure that we provide the right provision by the right people, but ultimately what's best for the young people and who's best to deliver that is the important factor in reaching those decisions.
Mr Swan and Mr McGuigan are not in the place, so that brings to conclusion topical questions to the Minister. Matthew O'Toole has given notice of an urgent oral question to the Minister of Justice. I remind members that if they wish to ask a supplementary question,